Good morning, everybody. My name is Mary Collier. I'm the Professional Development Program Manager at the Ontario Museum Association, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome you to Confessions of a Museum Professional 3.0, the Quarantine Edition, and which we are presenting in partnership with the Group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals Committee. So before I start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that Toronto, where the OMA offices are located, has been the site of human activity for more than 15,000 years. The land is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. And today, Toronto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. So thank you all for being here this morning. I hope everybody is feeling good and is ready for a really good conversation. I just want to start by making sure that everybody knows how to participate today. So you'll see the slides, as you can see on the screen right now. You'll hear and see the panelists, some of whom you can see on your screen already. And if you'd like to send a question to the presenters, simply type your question into the Q&A box that you can access at the bottom of your screen. Or if you'd just like to say hello to your colleagues, you can chat using the chat function, which is also at the bottom of your screen as well. My colleague Christopher Shackleton is signed in as the Ontario Museum Association, so if you have any technical questions throughout the webinar, you can direct them to him. So we'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions during the time that we have. We are recording the webinar today, and we'll be making them available after the fact as well. So today's webinar will be 1 hour and 15 minutes. We'll begin with a bit of an introduction, then I'll pass it over to the presenters. They'll have their great conversation, and then I'll make some quick announcements following the discussion, and we'll wrap up around 11:15 a.m. So there's lots to discuss today, so we'll get right into it. I'd like to introduce you to today's moderators. Diane, Pellicone, and Madeleine Smallers are members of the Group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals Committee. So Confessions of a Museum Professional was Diane's brainchild back in 2018 when it debuted at the OMA conference, and it was a top-ranked session that year, so they brought it back for 2019. And this year it only seemed fitting to take the conversation online. So we're grateful to Diane and Madeleine for partnering on this webinar so the conversation can continue. So I'm going to pass it over to Diane and Madeleine to get started.
All right, so I'm unmuted. Great. All right. So hi, thank you for that warm welcome. I'm just going to share the screen that we have here. All right. So yes, welcome to Confessions of a Museum Professional 3.0, the Quarantine Edition. Yes, my name is Diane Pellicone, and I live and work here in Toronto. I work as a project assistant at the Royal Ontario Museum. I am on temporary emergency leave, as are a lot of my friends and colleagues. So I've been keeping busy with baking and gardening and working on fun projects like this one. So I'll let Madeleine introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Madeleine Smallers. My pronouns are she and her. I live and work typically in Kingston, Ontario, although I've been all over the province the last few years after I graduated from University of Toronto's Bachelor of Museum Studies program. I'm on day 2 of a layoff from my current position as a museum assistant for the City of Kingston. And that's okay. I'm definitely keeping busy with projects like this. And I'm taking an online business management course right now. So I'm one of those people who just can't stop learning and reading, even textbooks that can be very dry for other people. And I definitely recommend window gardening. No matter where you live, it is so fun. And I have 12 whole tomatoes right now in my window. It's very exciting. We'll flip back to Diane to go.
All right, so as Mary explained, Confessions of a Museum Professional originated in 2018 at the OMA conference. I was working with the conference committee, and we were trying to think of different ways to better engage our museum community and share professional experiences with a wider audience. Some of you might be familiar with a lot of really great postcard projects out there. Some that I've found are Post Crossing, there's the Pandemic Postcard Project, there's the Toronto Postcard Club, and there's also Post Secret, which we drew a lot of inspiration from. And a lot of these projects are community-driven mail art projects that advocate for wellness, awareness, and a strengthening of personal relationships and other connections. So we just thought that it was a fitting way to connect better with our museum community. And returning for a third year is this quarantine edition. What we've decided to do is, while the format remains fairly the same, where we receive anonymous postcards sharing unique stories by our fellow museum professionals, what we've done is we've changed it up a little bit so that it's a shared human experience as part of our ongoing quarantine. And I'll let Madeleine explain a little bit more of that. And just to note as well that we also have an Instagram account, and we've expanded our online presence on the GOEMP website.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, find us on Instagram at Museum Confessions, I believe. Perhaps Diane can throw that in the chat. So, of course, this year we have changed things up a little bit. We introduced an online component where participants could submit their postcard confessions through our website instead of popping them in the mail. Although there is something special about getting something in the mail. I know I've been sending more mail lately, being stuck at home. And how often do we get mail that isn't bills or things that we actually don't really want to open? We recognize that for some it's easier to connect digitally right now, and it's how a lot of us are keeping in touch right now anyway. With the ongoing global pandemic, Canada Post as well as some other mail carriers, of course, have been seriously affected, reporting delays of 3 weeks or more in some cases. So we wanted to make more of an instantaneous connection for people to be able to type in a response, hit send, and that's it, and we have it. So our objective was to invite colleagues to share anonymously written postcards about studying, working, volunteering, interning in the cultural sector. Submissions should be constructive, pose questions, share frustrations, tell stories about your workplace, educational training, perhaps failures, what you've learned, and maybe experiences within the arts, culture, and heritage community. Subjects can range from hard-hitting questions or an airing of grievances to amusing behind-the-scenes type of glances. So we've really had a very wide range in terms of these digital submissions, and we look forward to diving into a large number of them today. So Diane, I'll flip it back to you.
So to keep things topical, we've given a particular focus to COVID-19 and its resulting mass quarantine measures. The postcards were sorted into 3 topics of discussion. So we have learning and programming for an online audience engagement, collecting and archiving during COVID-19, and how to reopen and recover after the pandemic.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we wanted to take this moment to thank our panelists so much. As chair of the Group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals and Diane as vice chair, we're only 2 of a group of 10. And so from all 10 of us and the entire museum community, thank you for participating. Each of you possesses a wealth of knowledge and experience ranging from curating and archival research to cultural consulting practices, digital engagement, and learning and programming. So I would like to flip it to our panelists now to introduce themselves. I would like to nominate Stacy to go first, if that's all right. And Stacy, perhaps when you're finished introducing yourself, you can choose the next person so no one's feeling a little lost. So take it away, Stacy, and welcome everybody.
Okay, thanks, Madeleine. I'm Stacy McLennan, and I'm the Collections Curator and Registrar for the region of Waterloo Museums. So I live in Cambridge, but I work in Kitchener, and the region of Waterloo owns and operates 3 sites within the bigger region. So the Concealing Waterloo Region Museum, Schneider House National Historic Site, and McDougall Cottage Historic Site. So I'm responsible for the collections at all 3 of those sites. One of the projects that I've been working on right now is we started a Help Us Make History initiative where we're soliciting submissions and objects from the public dealing with COVID-19. So that is sort of where I'm fitting into this presentation today. So over to Sarah to introduce herself.
Okay, I've unmuted, I'm sorry. So I'm Sarah Chu. Thank you for having me here in this virtual space. I am the acting manager of learning at the Royal Ontario Museum. I took on this role the week before museums closed, so it has been quite a bit of a steep learning curve for me in many ways. And right now, at the same time, I'm tasked with leading the digital content strategy for the whole museum. And this has proved some challenges, but some exciting opportunities for us in finding ways to be creative, to engage our audiences in a way that we have not engaged with them before. So I'd be happy to talk more about that later too. And I'm going to nominate Andrea.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Andrea Wilson. I'm the curator of the Craigleith Heritage Depot. It's a tiny rural museum on beautiful Nottawasaga Bay. And unlike some of you who recently closed, we closed on October 24th of 2019 due to radon issues in our building. So we had an immediate closure similar to the pandemic. We had to have staff off-site working, give them the equipment, and move forward. And we did a lot of things prior to that, unbeknownst to us, that helped us transition to this space. And now with the pandemic, we're continuing that transition. We're continuing to engage all of our staff in meaningful work and connecting them with our community. We also are actively collecting still and actively programming. So we're doing all of these things and planning for reopening, which we had already started to do with the closure for radon, which we have mitigated, thankfully. So, you know, we've started working on 2 other projects. So that's hopefully what I can share with you today, what we've been doing in that regard. And now I'm going to send it over to Maria.
Thank you, Andrea. So I'm Maria Piacente, and I'm the Vice President of Exhibitions and Events at Lord Cultural Resources. And so today I'll provide a consultant's perspective. For those of you who don't know, Lord Cultural Resources is a cultural and planning design firm based out of Toronto, but we do work internationally. And our key areas of service are exhibition development, which is the area that I'm responsible for, but also facility planning for new buildings, extensions and studies, and then strategy and management, which is usually master plans, strategic plans, and so forth. I think what we've been doing is that we've also closed our offices and everybody's working from home and remotely, and we're sort of getting used to this new reality. As a firm, we've been looking at how we can help our clients navigate these really uncertain times, which is, you know, looking at what can we help with reopening, or what are some of the issues with reopening and strategies, but also looking at more longer term resilience planning or future proofing your institution, and really understanding that things could be changing quite drastically and a new normal is ahead of us. Also looking at obviously digital strategies and how important that is, and also just providing support and coaching to some of our existing clients who are finding this whole situation very unsettling and very worrisome, and you know, providing that support there. So hopefully today I can provide a slightly different perspective than my colleagues.
All right, great. Thank you so much, everybody. We're so happy that you were able to join us this morning. So I'm just going to flip the slide. Thought that we'd start the slides off with one of the comments we received that I think resonates with a lot of people, whether you are working from home or maybe you're just Zooming with family and friends. I think a lot of us have been making something, whether it's bread or other crafts. And to kind of be gentle with ourselves and take it day by day. So I really appreciate receiving this particular comment, and I thought it kind of set the tone really well. So we'll just dive right in. And flip it over to our first topic, learning and programming for online audience engagement, which has been, I'm sure, a learning curve for a lot of people. So we'll just basically open the floor to our panelists. We did receive a few comments as well from some people who registered ahead of time, so we'll get to those as well. But actually, you know what, maybe we'll start with one of them. One of the questions that we received was, what have you been doing to keep your museum relevant with the public during this pandemic? So a lot of you have already spoken about different projects or programs and learning opportunities. So if anybody wants to dive right into that, and I will flip the slide over to our postcards that we received.
Okay, this is Madeleine here. We're using a hand-raising system on Zoom, so I'm kind of in charge of that. So I see that Andrea Wilson's hand is raised. So Andrea, please feel free to unmute yourself and dive in.
Well, thank you, Madeleine. I appreciate that. Like many of you, we've started doing our programs online, which is one thing that for some of our staff has been a real challenge. But in our case, because we were closed prior to, and in the last year, we created a digital creator space, and we're doing training with our staff and our community on digital media. That has really helped us to kind of bridge that gap. But it's still taking a lot of personal challenge for people to be on camera or doing their own videos. So part of that is helping staff feel comfortable doing that, giving them opportunities to say, I can't do it today. And I think that's really important because it is quite a stressful situation. And sometimes technology doesn't work as well. And that happened to me as well. And the public turned out to be really quite forgiving for that. And then they couldn't wait for us to get back on track. So that was really important. The second thing that we've been doing is actually going to Zoom meetings at Rotary clubs with our volunteers and trying to reach out in many different ways. And I know I did a Zoom meeting with Rotary, and you know, we've worked with them for years. They funded the museum. But in doing that meeting, I really found that there was a connection made with the members of that community that we hadn't had before. So we're doing that with our online programs, with our agricultural societies, with other organizations, with our church groups, so that we can keep in front of them as a support to what they are trying to achieve as well.
That's fantastic. For some of you who may know me fairly well, I used to work with Andrea up at the Craigleith Heritage Depot, and it has been so gratifying to see them continue to grow and explore these new technologies. And yes, very exciting for them. They also won an OMA award at last year's conference for everything that they're doing. So well done, Andrea. I see that Sarah Chu's hand is up next. So Sarah, please take it away.
Great. So one thing we've had to pivot to is, of course, like all museums, to ramp up our online content production, as well as imagining what digital experiences and engagement will look like within this time and in these contexts. And so it has been a concerted effort across the board, across many departments, to pull together resources, what we have left right now, to create what we're calling a ROM at Home platform. So we have an online portal where we have been posting consistent being weekly content across all the segments of our audiences. And so this includes ROM Storytime Live for younger audiences on Tuesday mornings, happening right now, in fact. Some learning portal activities and experiences for older school-age children, as well as adult content on our social media channels. And so I think the challenge for me, and I think for a lot of my colleagues in all of this, is shifting to operating a little bit like a startup, which we're not used to at all, like a tech startup, in that there's a demand for us to produce a lot of content very quickly. And this means working cross-departmentally to share a vision around this iterative design process, allowing yourselves to be agile, to be responsive, reflective, and adaptable, and being okay with failure and experimenting where we can. And for folks like me who do come from a tech background, that has been easier for me to adapt to than some of my colleagues. And I have to give credit to the team that we're working with right now. And I think we're doing a fantastic job of collaborating in order to produce this content, while I think at the same time for me working in education, I'm seeing my colleagues in the educational sector around that landscape, that we're acknowledging this is an unprecedented time. We're actually not quite building intentional and purpose-built online learning experiences. We're doing emergency teaching and learning. And in some ways trying to replicate that in-classroom or in-gallery experience on an online platform. And I think, like Andrea mentioned, it really does take a lot more time, effort, professional learning, resources to be able to do this more purposefully and meaningfully. But, we're doing the best we can with the resources we have.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That definitely intersects, I would say, with the comment at the top. This person realizing that you don't have to be physically in a museum to make a positive difference in the museum world and working from home. And that kind of self-isolation and working in this way has caused them to reevaluate and reconsider their work and the sector from new angles. So that's a really beautiful intersection there. I do see that Maria's hand is up next. So Maria, please take it away.
Thanks. Thanks, Sarah and Andrea. Your comments were really, really quite inspiring in terms of thinking about. My addition to what you'd said is that, digital was already gathering a lot of speed and a lot of energy before all of this happened. And then what happened is that COVID was kind of an accelerator, and now it's suddenly digital's time. And we're all we need to be nimble and flexible. Even our own firm, even though I don't necessarily have a digital background, I'm recognizing as a professional that I need to retrain myself and think about how digital is going to change the way in which we do business. And for all you young professionals that are listening today, as really thinking about taking this opportunity to think about how you will train yourself and be ready for the next stage of your career, because I think that we're going to be looking at less siloing and more integrating of different kinds of departments, and digital will sort of go across all of them because of the need for content. So it really is a great career move. And one of the things that we've been talking about for ourselves, and also just for our clients and for those who are thinking about digital in their institutions right now, is take the time to do like a digital readiness evaluation and look at, are we ready and where are the gaps? Where are we strong? Where are we okay? And where are gaps, so that we can begin to build our readiness for not just after the COVID pandemic, which, will go on for quite some months and into next year, but then beyond. So, what about our policies and mission? Are we recognizing that our digital is reflective of that? What are the gaps in staff and training? Is our content digitized, and what do we need to do to get to that next level of readiness? And I think that could perhaps allow us to think about what our needs might be for resources and staffing. And it's not going to happen overnight, but a simple little readiness tool might sort of bring the staff together and bring the team together to think about how to proceed in the coming phases.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria. Those are really fantastic points to hear from someone in your position who's been in touch with a lot of different people. A lot of our presenters have their hands up now, which is brilliant. So why don't I give the floor to Stacy McLennan so she can chime in as well.
Thanks. I just wanted to sort of weigh in on what has been said as well. When our museum was closed to the public, a number of our staff were laid off at the same time. So we're down to sort of a bare bones staff, and our direction at that time was that we needed to get things online. So again, it is sort of more an emergency. We just need to get our programs online. We need to get our education stuff out there. We need to get the collection out there as well as much as possible. But one of the great things I think that has come out of all of this is that I am working with colleagues that I don't normally work with, and we are really working as a team. So I'm working very closely with programming. We're sort of tapping into our inner Ken Burns and trying to do, you know, videos about certain subjects. And a colleague who had absolutely no tech background has learned how to use iMovie and can insert photos and still images, and we do voiceovers now. So it's been a really great time to be creative. And I think for us, at least, our upper management has given us the go ahead to be creative. And if something doesn't work, oh, well, we tried it, but at least we're trying, and we seem to be getting good public response back, even, you know, with the videos that aren't maybe as professional as they could be. But I think that our audience understands that and appreciates that we're just trying to get content out there for them.
Absolutely, Stacey. Thank you so much for sharing that. I did a few weeks of museum from home videos for friends and family on my Instagram, and hey, they weren't the most professional, but they were a lot of fun and they got a lot of engagement from them. What you said connects really beautifully with the second comment on the screen about this person who was wondering how to engage people who couldn't come to the museum because of financial or physical constraints. And with COVID-19, they learned that there are ways of engaging these audiences, and they want to increase their learning about how to do this. They commented that it's not right that certain segments of our population get left out of the learning of their history, and digital platforms are a fantastic way to do that. Someone before the presentation had sent in a question saying how essential are digital overhauls and the necessary funding in these times. And I think with everything, there is a balance, and we kind of have been forced more towards digital than we were before. But those of us who are able to tap into it even a little bit, I think have really seen the benefits. So I'm going to take a look and see who else's hands are raised. Oh goodness, lots of people. Why don't I flip it to Sarah Chu to comment next.
So one thing I just recalled that came up at the beginning of this project and that I continue to think about is some of the considerations we need to work on around equity and accessibility concerns. So a lot of the disparities in access to technology, digital proficiency have been exacerbated during this time. And so it's more of a question right now for us, and we have responses for, but I know that at the beginning of the pandemic for us, so around late March and early April, there were quite a few surveys that were sent out by cultural institutions, festivals, other sites around what kinds of resources can we produce that will support our communities. And I think it's due time now to follow up to gather feedback that will help with revamping, improving, ensuring that the resources we are putting out are meeting our community's needs and being responsive that way. But at the same time, maybe it means surveying community members who don't have access to technology. How can we be responsive to them? And I don't have the answer to that, but it's something I've been thinking about. I don't know if the other panelists have imagined strategies for doing that and can share. That has come up for me for sure.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I do see that there was a question that came through that flips things a little back to museum professionals from communities, and that Maria would like to answer this question live. If you're still okay with that, Maria, I'll read the question out now. The question is, what are the panelists' thoughts on digital content exhaustion / fatigue? Many people working from home don't exactly want to stay online after the workday, especially with the nice weather, which, I mean, I totally understand. We're all in a heat wave right now. And they're asking if the panelists have any ideas thoughts to continue engagement while dealing with this digital content exhaustion. Maria, please take it away if you're still okay with that.
Yeah, sure. I'll start. It's a great question, and one that we've been struggling with too. I've read opposing articles on this question. One was from Google Analytics, that there was some people were getting a lot of exhaustion from a lot of the digital overload, doing too many Zoom meetings, constantly connecting with families through Zoom, and only consuming their content through social media platforms. And then there was another article that really talked about how there's this really surge in growth in digital literacy, and people really recognizing that there's this real desire for a lot of great content. So I don't know if there's a real answer to this question yet. The one thing that we did recognize in just looking at some of the digital content that was very successful were those that were short, punchy, sweet, that 2 minutes, 5 minutes, no more than 10 minutes, anything that was like a half an hour or went too long, those were the ones that were really exhausting. But these kind of like punchy, bite-sized, and people were very forgiving of if the technology wasn't quite great, as long as the audio was good. And so some of the more creative experiences, right? Like right now, if you want to know a great digital program that's happening, it's the historic collection. The Historic New Orleans Collection is doing a music off for the COVID pandemic. It's just trying to find which is going to be the musical score of the pandemic. And so every couple of days they have one group battle another group. And so it's these kinds of very quick, interesting kinds of events that I think are defeating some of the exhaustion and fatigue. But I think we will expect that some people will be fatigued by it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those comments, Maria. Definitely ties in and dovetails a little bit with the third comment, in particular the second half of it. And this person kind of struggling with wanting to throw themselves into everything, but then also feeling like some days they just need to take the break. And that's in general, that even though they don't know yet what museums are going to look like, or even museum professions, I should say, the best thing we can do on a human level is look out and support one another, and certainly look out and support ourselves too. Well, this has been a great first topic. We're taking a peek at the time, and I think Diane and I have been chatting on the side, and unless anybody has some pressing final comments, I'll take a peek and see if there's any hands up. Beautiful. I think what we will do is move on to our second of 3 topics to keep things going along. So Diane, I will flip it to you to proceed.
Forgot to unmute there. Okay, so second topic is collecting and archiving during COVID-19. Initially, we were thinking of collecting and archiving community responses of COVID-19. There's been so many really great projects going on across the country and the world of museums and archives really trying to capture what the pandemic means. That said, some of the comments we received back were also just about the general collecting or lack of collecting, or ability to be in your collection space during the pandemic and quarantined at home. So we opened it up a little bit more. So I will just flip the slide. So just opening this up to our panelists again, are there any of these comments that maybe resonate with you specifically? And I know, not to put her on the spot, but I know Stacy is also working on her own community-driven project as well. So I will open up the floor and see if there's anybody who wants to kick it off.
And Stacy's hand has just shot up over there, which is fantastic. I think Stacy's actually joining us from her workplace today. So Stacy, please take it away from here. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to make a comment, first of all, about the first comment that says lucky enough to be a collections manager. And that was how I felt, I think, the first 2 weeks we were closed. I came into work, I'm the only person on site. I got so much done. It was amazing. Things that have been sort of sitting here for months, and I couldn't get to them, and it was great. It was a great feeling. And then as things started to shift for our organization in terms of priorities and getting digital content online, and then the Help Us Make History project, that has all, again, sort of gone to the back burner again. So now I still have piles of things that I need to deal with. But that one made me smile, because I think anyone who works with collections has that sense of, if you're allowed to still be at work, this is an opportune time to get those things done. And unfortunately for a lot of us, other priorities have come up and we aren't able to get to the things that we had been hoping. So I will just give you a little bit of background about our Help Us Make History project. So this was something that myself, the region archivist, and our region libraries came up with to solicit submissions, diaries, objects, photographs, videos, whatever, from the local residents about COVID-19, their thoughts, their feelings, how they're being affected, all in order to document and preserve those things for future generations, obviously. So I think our project has had a few hiccups. It's not as clear cut, I think, sometimes when you're in the middle of the pandemic and trying to collect and get the word out that you are interested in specific things. So for the moment, we actually haven't received any objects. I have emails from people, and I've accepted certain things, and I will get back to them when we are allowed to reopen and when it is safe to collect those items at that time. It's been an interesting mix of things that have come forward. A lot of the stuff we sort of assumed, like the painted rocks and things like that. Locally, a lot of our businesses have actually switched or retooled their production lines to start making like N95 masks, 3D printing the face shields. There's all kinds of things like that. So I have sort of an active working list of companies that I'm contacting that, once the pandemic sort of settles down or passes, and we can actually get some of those items from them, but that's more just in the future piece. We're not actually getting those things at this moment. We are getting written submissions. I think we've had over 75 so far, which I think is pretty good. They range. Some of them are extremely moving. I've had more than one cry at my desk from some of the submissions that have come in. And other ones are simply an email like, I can't see my friends and it sucks. So yeah, we all feel that way. And I think that's part of why the collecting project is also important at this time, is it's giving local residents a way to express what they're feeling. We've started sharing some of the submissions back with permission on our website and social media feeds, and we'll continue to do that as more of them come in as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing your experience thus far. That's a beautiful project, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that continues to unfold. Yes, that's definitely a great intersection with the first comment there, and a little bit with the last one too, worrying about crazy disasters befalling your collection when you're not there, even though you are checking in once in a while. We did get a question from somebody ahead of time who was asking for suggestions for combining remote work with limited on-site work when museums are not open to the public, and I think you're a beautiful example of that, continuing to check in and ensure that that keeps happening. I know at my own workplace, prior to layoffs, we were all rotating through and kind of doing felt like a relay through the museum to check on everything and check on the collections before proceeding. But it's wonderful to see that you are actively collecting stories, and hopefully the objects will come along in time. I see that Andrea has her hand up next, so why don't we flip it over to her?
Yes, thanks, Madeleine. All these questions were really great, and in our case, we were able to go back into our site, and so our staff have been going back in, and our maintenance people, to check on the mouse issue that we may have or not or have. So it's important that we keep on top of that as well, so that I don't wake up at 3 a.m. imagining disasters. But we do have protocols in place. We've got emergency alarms and those sorts of things as well. In regards to collecting for the pandemic, one of the things that I was really glad to have seen at the OMA conference last fall was a talk from the Dundas Museum, and they had done an education program around the Spanish flu. And I think of that when I think of collecting, because I think of, well, what were the things that they wanted to have when they developed that program, and, you know, the research they had to do to find those resources. So it was good, because I think about that when I start collecting. So when this first started, I started going around and photographing the signs at the Foodland in people's homes that they were posting, because it was a way that they were reaching out to the community. And then on top of that, the service organizations in our community, whose motto was service above self, and what they were doing to help us maintain our food services and cleanliness in our communities. And so those are the things that I started really actively photographing. The gas station prices dropping, you know, the simple things that every day people were having to deal with, you know, the changes in times for the liquor store opening. But it's the things that you can't really collect, like the discussion around the liquor store perhaps closing, what was going to happen. So those are the things that I keep thinking of when I'm doing collecting during the COVID-19 pandemic. But on top of that, a lot of people are at home, and, you know, they don't know what to do. So what they're doing is they're actually downsizing and cleaning out their house, and and they're contacting us saying, oh, you know what? I don't need this stuff anymore. Are you interested in it? So there's that part of it as well. And in some cases, we put out a newsletter every month. There's been response to the newsletters. Well, I have information around that. So it's quite a dynamic thing during this time, because you can't actually go and pick anything up from anyone, but it can be shipped to you. And we've been able to have material actually come to my home through Canada Post, and it sits waiting until I can open it up. And so we actually have been collecting, not necessarily around the pandemic even, but just around our own community history. And that's because people have started to pick up our social media, our online projects, and they're connecting to that. So they're connecting to us as well. So it's a very dynamic kind of place to be working, and having to do it within the procedures of COVID-19.
Thank you so much for that insight, Andrea. Certainly connects with the second comment on the screen. I wonder how history will remember the COVID-19 pandemic. I think a lot of us will remember it as doing ongoing spring cleaning and emptying of our homes, but also creating and sharing those things with museums. So that's a really beautiful outcome of this whole thing. I know that there are a couple other hands up right now, and Diane did have a comment. So Diane, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll flip it to Sarah too afterwards.
All right, sounds great. So one thing that's come up a lot in a lot of articles that I've read is this idea of rapid response collecting, and the pros and cons, I guess, of that. And I'm wondering if any of our panelists have experience with this, or if they have their own opinions or comments on how to do it. I know that there's a lot of pressure to document the pandemic as it's happening, which is difficult because we don't necessarily have enough perspective yet to look back on history and see how the pandemic is unfolding or has unfolded. So I'm not sure if anybody wants to jump in on that.
Thank you so much, Diane. I think we will flip it to Sarah and then Stacey after that. So Sarah, please go ahead.
So I think this topic warrants a pretty serious look into how we collect, so our collection methods. you know, I think worried or concerned about the voices and perspectives we are missing in our collection methods right now. Are we truly documenting all the diverse voices and perspectives through this? In particular, how can we emphasize marginalized voices rather than affirming, you know, what we see right now as a dominant narrative? I'm reminded actually of the Toronto Ward Museum's Block by Block project. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but what they're trying to do is document stories from community members around their shared lived experiences, especially in relation to resilience and marginalization within a handful of communities in the Greater Toronto Area. And so it's really about prioritizing and emphasizing these stories that get missed out in the wash. Oftentimes it means that community members who don't have access to technology can't submit their stories through a digital platform, or perhaps language barrier. So English is not their first language, and it's hard to communicate that through the methods that we typically collect within now. So how can we prioritize those voices? And I think also kids and youth have a lot to share. They have a lot of rich and meaningful insights to share about their experience now, and thinking about how we collect those voices and perspectives as well to build a more richer shared history of our time right now together.
Thank you so much. Those are all excellent comments. I definitely think that opening up the narrative, as you said, to greater diversity of voice instead of just affirming the current one, kind of that echo chamber of consent and everybody saying the same thing and hearing it bounce back at them. I think this is a great opportunity to challenge that and to open things up to a wider audience and make sure that we are getting those voices and stories that we wouldn't normally hear. As we know, with intersectionality theory, everybody is affected very differently depending on their circumstances and who they are and what they're experiencing. And it's so important to continue to apply that to collecting as well. I know that Stacey had her hand up, so why don't we flip it over to her now?
Sure, thank you. Just to add to what Sarah was saying, I guess I personally don't see our Help Us Make History project as just being for a set period of time during the pandemic. It certainly is something that will continue on after we start to recover, and we can continue to collect stories for as long as we want, really. We have been reaching out to local community groups, homeless shelters, things like that as well, to try to make them aware of our initiative and try to work with them on how we could potentially collect stories. It's a very slow process because obviously for community groups who are involved sort of at the front line, our project is not a priority for them. So it's just sort of this thing that we're trying not to be annoying about or to take people away from what they really should be focusing on. But I think making those connections at this stage so that at least if we can come back to them in a couple months time, a year time, and say, hey, we were doing this, remember we sent you an email at least, I think that's a good at least first initial step to try to make those connections to people. I was gonna say, one of the things about why the Help Us Make History project, how it sort of originated is, with the pandemic outbreak, I was actually looking through our collection for things related to the Spanish flu, and we literally have nothing, like nothing. It's quite shocking. And as a historian and a museum professional, I couldn't let this opportunity go by. And, you know, 20, 30 years from now, whoever's in my position at that point looks back and says, we have nothing related to COVID-19 pandemic. How did they let this happen? So as I said, I think our project is very flexible and it continues to grow and change as other things come into play. And that's sort of how we've created it. We're not actually accessioning anything at this moment. We are just seeking submissions. And as the submissions come in, we will then start to decide what we will actually accession officially for the collection and what we will keep basically as reference and research files as well. So there is sort of a distinction for us between what is actually part of the collection and what will be sort of supplemental to documenting what's happening at the time.
Thank you so much, Stacey. We do have a question from the audience, Madeleine Delaval, another Madeleine, hello, who's down in Windsor. She asked, how do you collect messenger conversations, memes, other social media stuff, and still be able to read it 50 years later? So I think she's kind of bringing to the fore digital ephemera as we are all moving online. So that's something that our panelists can think about. Keeping an eye on time and knowing that Maria and Andrea's hands are up. I think I will flip it to Maria next, and then we can finish off this topic with a comment from Andrea before we move on to our third and final one. So Maria, please go ahead when you're ready.
Oh, Maria, you are still muted.
I'm on mute. Thanks. I don't quite have an answer for the question on messenger, collecting messenger conversations, memes, and other stuff, and which is an excellent question. But I did want to make a comment that also connects to a question or a comment in the chat box, which is that there's an opportunity to partner with artists in our community who are also actively collecting in a way, and perhaps doing collecting in underserved communities, or looking at things in a different way. And I'm particularly want to point out the work of a local photographer by the name of George Pimentel, who is going around Toronto and taking sort of these very amazing photographs of what is happening in the community. And so he's documenting it in a very visual way and through an artist's eye, through photography. And I think that there may be other connections or other artists, perhaps some that are online today, but others that we know in the community that we can think of as a way of collecting that is slightly different from perhaps the more opportunistic story collection that is definitely a way that we need to collect and document what's happening right now. But I think that there are some opportunities with artists and that there is funding that is becoming available through the Canada Council for the Arts because they want to continue to support artists. And so perhaps there are some programs that museums can partner with artists in collecting and get access to some of this funding that the feds are making available and the province is making available. So that's a real possibility as well, and those can become very intriguing archival collections that the institutions might have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Maria. One of my friends and colleagues who works at the Canada Council for the Arts, I believe they were just starting to announce some things today or in the last 24 hours. I saw that pop up on LinkedIn this morning. So that's definitely an excellent point. And thank you for answering that question in the chat, or responding to that comment, I should say. Andrea, I think we will flip it to you for a final comment for this topic before we proceed to our third and final one.
Well, this actually goes to the previous topic and this topic, and what we brought up is many times issues of accessibility, and we certainly have been working on that. And if in our case, being a GLAM, we have free Wi-Fi even when we're closed. So when I go to the museum, there's usually cars parked in the parking lot accessing free Wi-Fi. And in a rural community, this is truly important. But for those people who don't have access to the technology, the actual physical hardware to access Wi-Fi, you can make an appointment with us and we will make sure you get it. And that's really important for people to connect either with family or friends or even us. And so that actually has been put into play. And we also have a staff member who can train you, and especially with seniors, to help you access these resources. So it's all been done in a proper, safe environment, one-on-one, masks, sitting, physically distancing, but helping people to access these resources, because it's all new for all of us and it's a big change. And so we've put that into play in our organization. And I think that working with the community is also understanding where they're at with these digital technologies. And so we have been in our past, through the Canada Council of the Arts, worked with artists to create digital training and media training. And so it's been a really great opportunity to have that in play prior to the pandemic. But I certainly encourage people to seek out those sources because it was a great benefit to us in our small community.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Yes, I definitely remember People was closed when I'd been allowed to access the free Wi-Fi. So that's a great memory I have from there. And thank you very much for sharing what you've been doing thus far. I think in our final 15 to 20 minutes, we will be moving on to the final topic, which is how to reopen and recover after the pandemic. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about that, and I will turn it over to Diane.
Great. So third and final topic is kind of a what next question. I particularly really like this meme. I'm a Star Trek fan, so it really spoke to me. But I think it does speak to where we're going with our operations, with our facilities, with our staff and volunteers. A lot of things are going to change. So we received a lot of comments that really spoke to this what's next, what will be our new normal. A lot of concerns about finding work after the pandemic kind of ends, how volunteers and front of house staff will be taken care of. So we'll open the floor to the panelists and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Diane. We did get a couple of comments/questions ahead of time, so I'll share them here now while our panelists read over and think about the confessions on the page. The first comment/question was, how do we help keep our volunteers safe and comfortable in newly opened museums in our post-COVID world or ongoing COVID world, depending on how the opening of everything goes? And there was also a great question with respect to the staff aspect. So how do public presenter staff or front of house staff, what can they do now to prepare for reopening, given that public health measures will change the way that we work? So all wonderful things to think about. And I think it's definitely very pressing issues for a lot of emerging museum professionals who may be more so in these front of house, frontline work positions. I see that Andrea's hand is up. So Andrea, why don't you take it away?
Yes, I think this is a really key thing. I mean, we're going through a huge change dynamic right now, and it's really hard for people to cope in the speed of this change. And I know some of the comments were really quite touching for me, because I know of other museums that have had, volunteers pass away during this time, and you really can't acknowledge that as well. But I have to say, one of the strongest things our organization has is their Occupational Health and Safety Committee. And our committee has just gone full force on this, and they are with us 100% of the way. And they are constantly at work on our behalf, not only because we're working at home, we're not in a true workplace. I mean, I'm sitting in a chair that I made, but it's not in a proper office chair. I'm not in an office environment. We have a lot of issues around having this change in our workplace. So I think in our organization, we're also going to be looking at upgrading and updating some of our policies. And some of that will work around, our mental health concerns too. And we did that last year, actually. We went through an entire training process with our staff on mental health training. And I think that really put us into a good place, even though there are continual challenges in this way. So for organizations who are looking for that kind of support, CAMH has some great resources, and I send you to that. And another question that came up was around a volunteer who passed away. And again, through CAMH, there's a great article. Well, it's actually a PDF through the, with the assistance of the Ontario Health Agency, and it's called When Grief Comes to Work, and it walks you through what bereavement would happen at work. And it's not just about your policy, your bereavement policy, it's how you're going to engage with the community. So in the case of COVID-19, we cannot gather in groups to have that chance to say farewell. So we need to start to think about, well, how will we do that? We need to give staff time to connect with those families and give staff time to do that as well. So I think empathy, working with your staff, getting to know how they're really feeling about these issues is key. And in our case, updating our own policies and being really being behind our staff in the challenges that they're going through. And, the case of the questioner regarding the level of social work and grief, I think whatever museums do, it's very social. We are connecting with people's past, present, and their future. And I really think that we have to, appreciate more where everybody is personally coming from in these regards. So not just about giving people time to, grieve, but also celebrating the people who were with you, but also celebrating in some cases together. And it's hard during this time of COVID-19, and it's really difficult to do it through a Zoom meeting. So I think those are things that we also need to start to consider as well.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And thank you, Diane, for flipping the screen to this really poignant confession from somebody. Although long, I'm so glad that you gave it its own slide, because this is something that we have all come face to face with. And there are many different types of loss that we are all experiencing. I know, for example, myself, having not had the opportunity, there we go, to see family members for months, and some having health concerns that I'm not able to physically be there and support them, it definitely makes you reconsider the kinds of support that you need and that other people need as well, and what you are actually able to provide at this time. So perhaps, Diane, you want to add a comment about that, and then if you don't mind, perhaps flipping back to the other screen. Thank you.
Yeah, no, this one really was, it was very powerful to receive. And I don't know if this anonymous writer was speaking particularly about COVID-19, but I think when we're working with an aging workforce and community organizations as well that are a bit more close-knit, I think this is something that a lot of museum professionals actually have to deal with on a regular basis. And I'm really glad that this person brought it up and kind of asking for more resources to be available for themselves or their colleagues going forward. And it was just very inspiring, and it was very nice to think about those wonderful memories with those people that they really enjoyed spending time with. So thank you so much, Andrea, for bringing to light all those wonderful things. I thought that was really beautifully said. I'll flip the screen. Oh, sorry, that was forward. Spoiler. Back to here, I think there were, there's definitely a lot of other things to unpack for how to reopen and recover. One thing I wanted to bring up, I read about how the Canadian Museum of Nature ran a day-long crisis and business continuity exercise back in November, so that everyone at the museum would know their roles in case a disaster struck. And I know that they were thinking more about, water damage or tornadoes or things like that. But I think that was actually really forward thinking of them. And I'm wondering if that's something that museums and galleries going forward would start implementing within their own.
I think we may have lost Diane.
Oh no.
Oh, I think you're just cutting in and out, my dear. Are you okay?
Am I back?
Yes,
okay.
You are back.
Okay. Not to go on that tangent again.
Just a little glitch.
Okay, not to go on that tangent again, but basically wondering if any of our panelists are thinking about how to implement some of these training exercises, I guess, to better prepare themselves and their coworkers.
Yes, that's a great point, Diane. Thank you very much. And it definitely ties in with the first confession here. I think we have an opportunity to make museums better, not just museums themselves, but certain museum professions as well. I do see that Maria has her hand up, so why don't we flip it to her?
Sure. A couple of comments. I would first, I wanted to draw attention to the person who wrote a postcard about their dream of having a full-time job and realizing that perhaps this might be that this dream may or may not be fulfilled. And I think just recognizing that museums have had a shock to the system, just like other organizations and businesses, restaurants, and so forth. And I think how museums are going to come back in terms of how they're organized and how they're staffed is going to be something that is going to happen in phases. And I think recognizing that as a sort of as a young person or as a new professional, you know, making sure that your skills are nimble and your skills are flexible. I think that when museums reopen, they're going to be reopening in phases, really focusing on the local audience, and recognizing that the ways in which we generated revenues in the past are not going to be possible for us. So that earned revenue from rentals and weddings and gatherings is not going to be there. So we're going to be very dependent in Canada and in Ontario on government funding to help us get us through this time. But that, you know, money is not going to be enough. And so what are the ways in which we can generate revenue, cultivating our membership bases, really reaching out to them. There are supporters, there are the ones that, you know, are donors and are supporters and will be there. So perhaps finding ways to reach out to them, to find ways to, you know, I hate to be crass about monetizing that situation, but it's really about reaching out to them to make sure that they're there. But recognizing as you're moving into this is like, what are the frontline positions that are really going to be there in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months? And that's going to be visitor services, education, you know, the ways in which helping visitors on the front line to help them navigate the exhibitions in social distancing ways, so that there are opportunities there. But I think that the sort of contract model is going to be with us for a bit, and so recognize that, be prepared for it, get your CVs in order to do that. So, you know, I want to encourage you, be positive and encourage you, but now's the time to get that, and also to retrain yourselves on the digital aspect, because again, integrating across all the different disciplines in museums is going to become more and more apparent as museums recognize that they have to find a way to bring their audiences back into the museum. And how do they do that? And it's really a visitor and audience-centered approach.
Thank you very much, Maria, for kind of zooming out and taking, oh gosh, I didn't mean to make a Zoom pun, I'm sorry, that was really unintended, for zooming out and looking at the bigger picture here. That was terrible. I've been doing that a lot lately when it comes to this topic, but also just the coming new reality for museums in general. That is so important to have been thinking about already, just like the fine folks at the Canadian Museum of Nature, but for all of us, really. It is 11:08 right now. I see that Stacy and Andrea's hands are up. So what I think I'd like to do at this point is to hand it over to Stacy next, and then Andrea, and we'll start to close out this conversation before Mary would like to make her final remarks. So Stacy, please go ahead, and then we'll give the final bit of the floor to Andrea.
Okay, thank you. I just want to talk a little bit about, I guess, reopening, because we have 3 very different sites that we're responsible for. I mean, one is a historic cottage where literally if you get 5 people in there, it's very crowded. And then we have our site, which we have galleries, but we also have a 60-acre heritage village that people can walk through. So our directive in regards to reopening is that each site will be taken as its own entity. So it's not that all the museums will necessarily open at the same time. We will look at timelines for each individual site and what works best for them. So it may actually be easier to reopen the small cottage because it's very clearly one entrance in, one entrance out. There's not a lot of, there's one bathroom, it would be easier to clean, things like that. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, is that just because a museum starts to reopen doesn't necessarily mean that all the museums within that area will be at the same sort of schedule. And the other thing that we've very clearly been told is that the health and safety of our staff and volunteers come first. So it's a very unusual thing for, I think, museums to think of, because we're always thinking of our visitors first. But in our case, with regards to reopening, if it's not safe to do so, we will not be doing it. So I think that's just a message to maybe share with people as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacy. And Andrea, if you'd like to go next, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to respond to that last comment about upper management. And I just want to say that, in our case, our upper management's taking a lot of stress because our budgets are going to be completely, well, they're fictional right now. And we're going to have to work really hard to manage that. And they have to run the gamut of working with our board, our committees, and also the municipal council. And I think that's a really stressful place to be as well. So we have to do whatever we can to help them realize the goals that we need to achieve, which is success in the end. And I think everybody needs to work together. So if you're finding that you're a bit disconnected from your upper management, just think about the things that you might be able to do to make that better for them, because it doesn't always come from below. It also percolates from the bottom up, and that's certainly what happens in our organization. And we see ourselves as cultural influencers through our social media, but we need to influence within our own organization as well. And so maybe you can consider strategies for that within your own organization. And you might think, oh, I just can't break into that, but there might be little things you can do to help, your manager to go through this, help them with the stress that they're going through as well. And so some of the things we are doing is exactly what Stacy's saying. We're opening in different, our gallery library will be opening fairly soon. We are not going to be opening for a while, but we'll have access to materials in different ways. And so that actually presents itself to our council, to the community, that, we're really there for them. And I think that's a key thing.
Thank you, Andrea. I think that's a really refreshing note to start to close out our conversation. This pandemic and this experience has been a massive equalizer for a lot of people. And I think one of the core messages that is so important to carry forward in our lives and our work is one of overall wellness, taking care of ourselves, being gentle with ourselves, but also with our coworkers and our institutions. This is a real opportunity to kind of pick ourselves and pick each other up rather than focusing on the negative. And as my mom says all the time, one day at a time and one step at a time. And I think it would be very, very beautiful and very productive if we were able to do that together as individuals, as a sector as a whole as well. So thank you all so much. I think we are right on time for Diane to allow Mary to start her screen share to close out the webinar today. So thank you.
Yeah, so that was beautifully said. And I think keeping everyone informed and engaged is so important for moving forward within museums, galleries, and other cultural institutions. We are right on time, so I don't think I'll be able to ask any final questions from our panelists or from our audiences. So I'll just dive right into in conclusion. thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here. It was really an engaging conversation. Everyone brought so much to the table from their own personal experiences and work life. So thank you so much. Thank you to our audience as well for submitting questions ahead of time and also during our Q&A, which Madeleine, she was able to go through those questions in rapid fire and all the raising of hands. So thank you for that. So this project, I mean, it continues on year round. I know that there tends to be a bit of a kind of a uptick, I guess, around conference time, but I'm really hoping that this can continue and we can continue collecting postcards and paper or digital. So please continue mailing in your comments. We are more than welcome to keep the conversation going through social media and other avenues. Just reminding everyone to visit the Group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals Facebook, as well as our website, where we have some really great resources. We also have our Confessions Instagram page. So I've put both of our handles here on our slide presentation. And yeah, I think that's it. So I'll actually let Mary speak to this, but basically we have tomorrow kind of a Museums Connect weekly session. And thank you. Just ending on a bit of a happy, be safe, stay healthy comment that I think we're all always very familiar with at this point.
Absolutely. Thank you for closing that out, Diane. And I know Mary has a small handful of slides now to close us out.
Hi again, everyone. Well, thank you so much sorry, just going to get my things in order there. Yeah, I want to give a big thank you to Diane and Madeleine for pulling this all together and encouraging the conversation and leading the session. So thank you so much, and the Group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals. And thank you, Sarah, Andrea, Stacey, and Maria for bringing your insights and experience and thoughts today. It was really a wonderful conversation. And thank you to everybody who signed in. You're what make these webinars tick. So I just popped a link in the chat to the registration for our next Museums Connect On member check-in, which is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And the theme for tomorrow is essentially it's a continuation of this discussion. Diane and Madeleine are going to be there to kind of co-host with us, and any of the things that that were discussed today, we can keep that that conversation going. And if you have anything else that you want to bring forward as well that was inspired by today's talk, or anything that's going on in your community, please do bring it forward. We're having a great time at these weekly check-ins, so please do join us. We're actually going to be taking a bit of a break next week from webinars, but make sure you keep an eye on our social media and your newsletter for the next one that's coming up. So, and also to that end, we have an evaluation that is going to pop up for you when this webinar is done. So please do just take a couple minutes to let us know how we did today. Let us know what you want to see more of, what we should keep doing, what we should add to our roster, so that we can keep providing you with some good content. So as you know, this webinar was offered free of charge as a service to the community. And if you're able, there are some things that you can do to help the OMA to continue to provide timely and accessible resources. If you're already a member, please renew your membership when you get your notification in your email. If you're not a member, consider joining us. We'd love to have you. And you can find all that information about membership on our website. Or please consider making a donation. You can do that as well on our website or through Canada Helps. Any way that you can support the OMA just makes us stronger as a sector, and having this part of a community is really important. So thank you for everything that you do. This is our homepage. This is the permanent link where you can get to the COVID-19 resources page. That is where we have been putting all of the resources that we find as they are available. That is also where we'll be putting the link to the recording of this webinar. And there's a little bit of contact information for both the OMA and the group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals. What I should also mention is in the webinar evaluation will be a couple of questions about your understanding of data and digitalization of your organization, which would really, feedback on that would really help us to have a better understanding of that moving forward and how we can support museums to be more digitally aware and functional in the future. So as I mentioned, please stay in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you everybody for your participation today, and have a great day.